Welcome back to Sleepy Lorekeeper. Tonight, we walk the last corridor of a dying god's mind. This is the dream that came after the blade, the echo between light and ruin. This is the Dream of Horus. The moment of death does not come with silence. It comes with sound, a low hum, a note that seems to resonate from within the bones themselves. I felt it as the Emperor's blow landed, a vibration that was neither pain nor peace. Only the truth made audible. Then came the light. Not the light of salvation, nor the light of divine wrath. A pure, absolute brilliance that seared through armor and flesh alike. I had seen the suns of 1,000 worlds, but none of them burned like this. And within that burning, I fell. There was no ground to meet me, no darkness to catch me, only descent without direction. The battle faded. The screams, the impact of bolters, the thunder of titans, all washed away like paint beneath water. The only sound left was the echo of my own breath. I do not know how long that breath lasted. Seconds, perhaps. Centuries. I was still aware of my body, but it no longer obeyed the laws of matter. It felt lighter, as if each molecule of my existence had begun to drift apart. When the pain left, I expected oblivion, but instead came memory. At first, only fragments, the feel of Luna's dust beneath my boots, the smell of machine oil in the forges, the taste of ozone on the air before battle. Then faces, my brothers, one by one, sanguineous, radiant, and doomed. Leman, fierce as storm. Rogal, silent and immovable. And finally, the one I cannot bear to name, though his light fills every shadow of my mind. My father, the Emperor, the beginning and the end. I should have hated him, and perhaps I still do. But in this dream, hate dissolves easily. What remains is something rawer, something closer to the truth. Love twisted by pride. Devotion poisoned by understanding. A son reaching for a father who had already turned to walk away. The thought circles endlessly, like a starship orbiting a dead planet. I cannot escape it. Around me, the void stirs. It is not empty. The warp whispers, low and familiar, as if greeting an old friend. I have lived long enough among its lies to know what it is. Temptation, wearing the skin of comfort. But I am too tired to resist. The darkness here is warm, like an old cloak draped across my shoulders. I drift, and memory takes form again. The deck of the vengeful spirit. Moments before the end. I see myself kneeling, armor cracked, blood steaming in the airless void. My father stands before me. Immense, radiant, yet not angry. His weapon hums softly, a vibration that shakes the foundations of reality. I remember that moment too well. The last heartbeat before he struck. He did not speak. I expected words, judgment, accusation, perhaps even love. But there was only silence. I wonder now if he could not speak, or if he simply had nothing left to say. The dream twists. I am no longer there, but somewhere earlier, long before the heresy, before the shadow. I stand on a high platform overlooking the sprawl of Luna's docks. Great engines thunder below, legions preparing to depart for the first Great Crusade. I can smell the ozone, feel the heat radiating from the launch bays. I am young, impossibly young, though I have never truly been a child. My armor gleams silver, unmarred. My heart beats with faith. He stands beside me. The Emperor. His presence fills the air like the weight of gravity itself. I do not look at him directly. Few ever could, but I feel his attention settle upon me. It is a strange warmth, neither affection nor command. Something more primal. Recognition, perhaps, the craftsman regarding his masterpiece. "You are my first," he says. Or perhaps the memory invents the words, because they sound more like thought than speech. I nod, proud, unworthy, desperate to please. Even now, I feel that desire like an old wound reopening. To be seen, to be chosen, to be loved by something that cannot love as men do. The void shivers. The dream reshapes again. The forges vanish. I am aboard a warship, the Justairen around me, the air heavy with incense and victory. We are fresh from Ulanor, the greatest triumph of our age. The Emperor stands before the assembled legions, his voice resonant, his presence terrible in its beauty. He names me Warmaster. The galaxy roars its approval. My brothers kneel. The Emperor smiles. I should have known then that I was being buried beneath the weight of that moment. To be raised above one's brothers is to be set apart from them. The warmth of their loyalty hides the chill of isolation. I see it now, though I could not then. When he crowned me with glory, he also marked me for ruin. The gods only needed to whisper. I drift further, deeper into the current. My mind fractures like ice beneath pressure. I see glimpses of the war that followed, the first seeds of dissent, the slow twisting of belief. But before the nightmare returns, there is one more memory, softer than the rest. The night after Ulanor. The feast long ended. The fires dimmed. I walk alone through the gardens of the Imperial Palace, under skies that no longer exist. I find him there, standing beside a pool reflecting the stars. He turns to me, not as a god, but as a man, though even then his face is impossible to fully behold. In this dream, I imagine what he might have said, that he was proud, that he feared what I might become, that he loved me in the way only a creator can love what he has made. But even in memory, he says nothing. He simply rests his hand upon my shoulder, and the touch burns, not with pain, but with unbearable clarity. For a moment, I see what he sees, a future so vast it devours hope, a destiny built on sacrifice. When his hand withdraws, the warmth fades. I am alone again. The vision collapses. The void howls. The warp's voices rise once more, laughing softly, mockingly. They call me by names I do not recognize: conqueror, savior, betrayer. I want to tell them to stop, but the words will not come. Perhaps they are right. Perhaps I have been all of these things. But beneath the laughter, another sound begins to emerge. Faint, distant, rhythmic. A heartbeat. Not mine. His. I follow it through the dark, step by step, thought by thought, until I stand again at the threshold of that final moment. The Emperor's eyes blaze with impossible light. I raise my weapon, though I know I cannot win. Around us, time unravels. Every star I ever conquered, every brother I ever loved, flickers in and out of existence. When the blow lands, I understand something I never did before. It was never vengeance. It was mercy. The light grows brighter. The sound becomes unbearable. And then, at last, there is only silence. But within that silence, I feel the echo of a voice I had forgotten. My own. And I realize the dream has only begun. There are no beginnings in the warp, only continuations. When the light faded and the silence deepened, I found myself standing within something that was not a place, but a memory stretched thin across eternity. It was warmth first, not of fire, but of purpose. The kind that moves through a being not yet burdened by doubt. I remember the first time I opened my eyes. There was no mother's voice, no cradle, no sky. Only the low hum of reactors, the shimmer of glass, the gloved hands of those who believed they were making gods. They did not name me Horus then. To them, I was Subject Primus. A weapon still unsharpened, a vessel of potential waiting to be filled. The first sensation that felt like life was not breath, but command, a voice, smooth as the void between stars, resonating through marrow and thought alike. It said, "Rise." And I did. Even now, that single word still trembles at the core of what I am, or was. The first act of obedience, the first surrender disguised as purpose. I was not born into childhood. I was born into function. I knew the motions of war before I understood the meaning of sleep. I could recite the names of extinct empires and the patterns of orbital decay before I could dream. And yet somewhere within those artificial origins, a strange thing took root. Love. Not for myself, not even for my kindred, but for the one who had made us. He was beyond comprehension, yet to my first sight, he seemed so terribly human. His eyes were not fire then. They were patience and measure. When he spoke, the air seemed to hold its breath. I remember the first time his gaze found me. The faint tilt of his head, the small nod, the momentary approval that felt like sunlight piercing through an endless storm. That single gesture sustained me for centuries. We learned quickly, all of us, but I first. The forges of Luna, the black sands of the Martian plains, the corridors of the Imperial Palace still fresh with unspent glory. These were my classrooms. He taught not through affection, but through example. Perfection was his language, and we were to become fluent in it. I never questioned it. Not then. When the time came to lead, I did so as though I had always known how. The first campaigns blurred together in a haze of steel and fire, each victory more effortless than the last. It was not arrogance that guided me, but conviction. The certainty that every world subdued, every banner raised, was another note in a song we were composing together. I thought the music would never end. There was joy in those days. Yes, joy. It is easy now, from the depths of my ruin, to forget that there was once laughter in the legions, the laughter of men who believed they were building paradise. We did not think of death or sacrifice. Those were abstractions, necessary instruments in a greater design. We saw the Emperor as infallible, and by extension we believed ourselves reflections of that infallibility. A dangerous faith, that one, the belief that the divine can be mirrored. I remember the first time I saw Terra from orbit. The world shimmered beneath me like a jewel cradled in black velvet, oceans reflecting the faint gold of the rising sun. He stood beside me on the viewing deck, silent. I asked him, though perhaps it was only my memory that adds the question now, whether he thought humanity was ready for the burden of unity. I imagine he smiled then, a rare thing, small and sharp. And if he spoke, the words have long since dissolved into the warp, but the silence that followed carried meaning enough. He believed we were ready. He believed I was ready. The Great Crusade began as an act of faith disguised as reason. We called it reclamation, a return to order after the long night of strife. But what we truly sought was something far older: belonging. To be part of something so vast, it could eclipse doubt itself. To serve a vision so perfect that it could forgive our imperfections. That was his promise. That was his lie. I led the Luna Wolves then, before we bore the name Sons of Horus. Their loyalty was a living thing, fierce and luminous. Every battle we fought, every victory we carved into the void, felt like a step closer to something transcendent. When they shouted my name across the comm channels, when they bled beneath my command, I felt not pride, but completion. I was the instrument of his will, the extension of his design. And yet, even in those earliest triumphs, I sometimes caught glimpses of a shadow that trailed behind him. A hesitation in his eyes when he spoke of the warp. A silence too long when I asked about the psychers we captured. A tension, subtle but undeniable, whenever he looked at the stars for too long. The others did not see it, or refused to. To them, he was perfection made flesh. To me, he was a man holding up the sky alone. I remember one campaign in particular, the American Reclamation, a war fought not for conquest, but for remembrance. The people there still clung to myths of the old earth, gods of light and darkness, half forgotten even before the age of strife. We brought them unity, or so we said. But when their temples burned and their priests wept at the sight of our banners, something inside me faltered. The Emperor called it progress. But I wondered, briefly, whether we had only replaced one faith with another. The thought was fleeting, but it stayed, buried deep. Years passed, or centuries. Time lost meaning in the endless march of conquest. We built monuments, not for vanity, but for remembrance. Each world we claimed bore the mark of the eagle, the promise of unity under the master of mankind. When I closed my eyes, I saw not the stars, but a single golden light stretching ever outward, consuming the dark. And in my dreams, I heard his voice, not commanding, but encouraging. Keep going, my son. The galaxy awaits. I did, until even the light began to waver. The crusade grew too large, too loud, too proud. Worlds were won faster than they could be kept. Governors rose and fell in a single generation. Faith replaced reason. Ritual replaced knowledge. I began to see what he had feared all along, that the empire we built was becoming a god unto itself. And yet, he withdrew, slowly, quietly, as if preparing for something he dared not name. When he left me in command, I understood it as trust. Now I see it was necessity. He had turned inward, to his secret work beneath the palace, chasing a dream of humanity unbound from the warp. He left me to rule in his name, and I did. I ruled well, too well perhaps. The weight of the stars pressed down upon my shoulders. The love of my brothers became deference. Their laughter grew quieter. Their eyes watched for weakness where once they had seen kinship. To be Warmaster was to be a sun. Brilliant, radiant, but slowly burning oneself into ash. And in the distance, something waited, something patient and eternal, watching through the cracks of my soul for the moment when devotion would curdle into doubt. Even now, in this dream, I can almost feel it. The first whisper, not of words, but of longing. A voice that spoke not from without, but from within, using my own thoughts as instruments. It said, "You were made to serve, not to rule. Yet you were the only one who truly understood what it meant to lead." I remember pausing, looking up at the void through the viewport of my flagship. The stars seemed closer that night, almost listening. Perhaps they were. Perhaps they always are. The crusade had become a prayer said too many times, its meaning eroded, its rhythm mechanical. Even the Emperor's dream began to sound hollow when repeated by 1,000 mouths that did not understand it. And in that hollow space, I began to wonder, if unity demanded blindness, was it truly unity? If obedience required silence, was it truly faith? I did not yet know it, but the gods had already heard my questions, and they never waste an open mind. Still, in those days, I was not a traitor. I was a son. I fought for a father who no longer fought beside me, loved a creator who no longer looked at me. I carried his light even as it began to fade. I wanted nothing more than to bring it back. But love, when starved of recognition, turns bitter. And faith, when left unanswered, becomes hunger. That was the beginning, not of rebellion, but of yearning. I see it now, in the distance of memory. Myself standing before the war council, banners fluttering, armor gleaming. My brothers speak, debate, quarrel. I watch them all, and behind my calm expression, a question festers like a wound. Where is he? Does he still believe? Do I? The dream begins to tremble again. The vision fractures. I feel the first flickers of the wound that will soon open everything. The stars bend and blur, reshaping into the world of Davin. The rot begins. There are wounds that bleed, and there are wounds that speak. Mine did both. When the memory of Davin returns, it comes not as a place, but as a fever. The air there was heavy, thick with disease, but not of the flesh. It was a corruption of spirit, a rot that moved faster than infection, carried on whispers instead of spores. I remember the sky first, green and bruised, clouds swollen like organs about to burst. Beneath that sickly light, the soil steamed, and the rivers smelled of decay. We had come to reclaim what we thought was ours. We were wrong. It began with the rebellion of a forgotten governor, a petty warlord whose name I can no longer recall, though his treachery would shape eternity. We expected resistance. We did not expect revelation. The first to fall were my soldiers, strong, loyal, perfect in their devotion. They walked into fog and did not return. When we found them again, their eyes were gone, replaced by orbs of glass filled with black liquid. Their armor was marked by symbols that moved when no one watched. They did not attack. They sang. I remember standing on the edge of that battlefield, hearing their song ripple across the swamp like a tide. It was beautiful. Terrible, yes, but beautiful in the way of things that have seen the end and accepted it. I gave the order to fire. The air burned. The song stopped. And still, I can hear it now, echoing through the quiet of death, patient as the dark between stars. I should have turned back. I should have burned the world and left it to silence. But pride is a kind of gravity, and I was its planet. We pressed on, through the rot and the ruin, toward the temple that had risen from the swamp like a wound that refused to close. It pulsed, not with life, but with attention, as if something vast beneath the soil had opened an eye. Inside, the air was warm and wrong. The walls pulsed with veins of living metal. Statues of shapes I could not name lined the corridors, some human, some not, all distorted by ecstasy and agony intertwined. At the center was the object I should never have touched. A blade, blacker than shadow, sharper than truth. When I lifted it, I felt the wound open, not on my flesh, but within my being. It was as though the universe itself inhaled through me. The pain was instantaneous and infinite. My vision fractured into 1,000 realities, and in every one, something waited, smiling. I remember falling. The ground met me with a softness that was not mercy but invitation. The world darkened. And then the whisper came. It did not come from without. It rose from within, like a thought I had never dared to think made suddenly audible. "Why do you suffer?" it asked. "Why do you bleed for one who will never bleed for you?" I tried to answer, but my mouth was full of blood. The whisper did not wait. "You have given everything. Command, loyalty, faith, and still he withholds his truth. He builds his empire not for mankind, but for himself." The voice was soft, and the words fit too neatly into the spaces I had already carved for doubt. He left you, Horus. He left you to bear his burden while he hides in the dark, dreaming of a world without you. For the first time in my long life, I felt small, the kind of smallness that no glory can hide. I tried to rise, but the wound had grown teeth. It fed upon every thought, every memory. Faces began to swim through the darkness. My brothers, my sons, my father. Each looked at me with the same expression. Disappointment, pity, something colder than hate. Then they melted away, and in their place stood a figure made of shifting light, neither man nor woman, neither God nor reflection. It, or perhaps they, extended a hand. "Do not fear me," it said, though the words were felt rather than heard. "You have feared long enough. Come, let me show you what he hides." I reached out, and the universe changed. There are no words for what I saw, not because they do not exist, but because they were never meant for mortal tongues. Colors that sang, sounds that glowed, emotions that took shape and moved like living things. At the heart of it all was a single revelation. The Emperor was not the only one capable of creation. The gods of the warp, those we had been taught to despise, to fear, were simply the reflections of humanity's own potential, amplified and unbound. Where he sought to chain the soul, they offered liberation. It was a lie, of course, but the most dangerous lies are those that sound like freedom. The fever broke. I awoke aboard the vengeful spirit, surrounded by my sons, their faces carved from stone. They told me I had been struck by a cursed blade, that I had hovered between life and death for days, that the priests had prayed, the apothecaries despaired, the legions held their breath. They said my recovery was a miracle. They were half right. I was healed, or something like healed. The flesh mended, but something else had been added. A presence, silent but attentive. A weight that followed me from the moment I opened my eyes. When I closed them, I saw again the light that had spoken to me. When I slept, it shaped my dreams. When I woke, I felt its gaze upon me. It did not command. It simply waited. I resumed the crusade, but everything had changed. The stars no longer shone with wonder. The Emperor's name no longer filled me with pride. Every victory felt hollow. Every brother's laughter echoed with falseness. And when I stood upon the bridge and looked into the void, I could almost see something moving there. A ripple in reality that pulsed with my heartbeat. That was when the whispers became words. They did not come from the air or from any voice external, but from the rhythm of thought itself. Each time I questioned, the answers arrived. Why should you bow to one who hides his throne beneath lies? Why should you lead men who will never see as clearly as you? Why build an empire for one who calls himself man, but dreams of being God? I tried to resist. Truly, I did. But resistance is a slow erosion, not a single act. Each whisper I denied returned softer, sweeter, more patient. They never argued. They only agreed with the doubts I already possessed. My brothers noticed. Some with concern, others with fear. Lorgar saw first, perhaps because he had already fallen, though I did not know it then. He came to me on the fields of Carcharis, his armor still dusted with scripture ash, and spoke of faith not in the Emperor, but in the powers beyond. He called them truth-given form. He said they had shown him what lies behind the veil of reality. I told him to be silent. I told him he was mad. But the words felt hollow in my mouth. He smiled, and I hated him for it. That night, I dreamed again. The same figure of light returned, though now I could see its face, my own, but more beautiful, untouched by failure. It said nothing at first. It simply reached out, touching the wound that still throbbed beneath my armor. "You still bleed," it whispered. "Yes," I answered, though perhaps I only thought the word. "Then you still live," it replied, and when it smiled, I saw eternity reflected in its teeth. I awoke in silence, the echo of its laughter still vibrating through the air. When I stood before my sons later that day, they did not notice the change, but the mirror in my quarters did. When I passed it, the reflection lingered a moment too long, smiling when I did not. From that day onward, every act of loyalty felt heavier, as though it cost something irretrievable. Every word of praise from my subordinates tasted like ash. The Emperor's absence became a wound deeper than the one carved by the cursed blade. I began to see betrayal not as crime, but as revelation. Not rebellion, but awakening. The gods did not rush me. They are patient, infinitely so. They understand that the greatest corruption comes not from force, but from choice. They whispered of freedom, of destiny, of a humanity no longer bound by a tyrant's silence. They told me I had been chosen, not as servant, but as equal. And I believed them because I wanted to believe them. That is the cruelest truth of all. The gods do not make us fall. They simply give us the language to explain why we already have. As the crusade went on, I began to see the Emperor's dream for what it truly was. Not unity, not enlightenment, control. An empire built on silence, on obedience without question, on worship of a man who forbade worship. He called it reason. I called it chains. And so, when the whispers asked me the final question, "What if you could make it better?" I answered without hesitation, "Yes." The figure of light smiled again, and for the first time, I did not look away. It stepped closer, merging with me, dissolving into my skin like breath into glass. For a heartbeat, I saw the universe as it truly was, not stars, not matter, but a living symphony of hunger and thought. I understood everything. And then I fell again, deeper than before, into the dark that had been waiting since the beginning. When I awoke, I was no longer the Emperor's son. I was his reflection, turned against him. The wound had healed. The whisper had become my voice, and the galaxy trembled beneath the sound of it. There is a silence that comes before war. It is not peace. It is the deep inhale of the universe before it begins to scream. I remember that silence well. It was the stillness between the heartbeat of revelation and the first shot fired in betrayal. The calm before the galaxy began to burn. The wound on my chest had long since closed, but the one within me had not. It pulsed in rhythm with the engines of the vengeful spirit, a second heart beating out of sync with the first. Every vibration of the ship seemed to echo its throb. My sons thought me recovered. They saw my composure, my command, my calm precision in strategy, and believed that the Warmaster had returned to his throne of steel and flame. They were right, but not in the way they imagined. Something had returned, but not the man they knew. The whispers were no longer whispers. They had become presence, not intrusive, not alien, familiar, like thoughts I had always owned but never dared to think aloud. They did not command. They did not demand. They suggested. And I, eager student of destiny, simply understood. When I looked upon my brothers, I began to see them differently. Each of them was a reflection of something he had withheld from himself. Angron, his rage. Mortarion, his endurance. Fulgrim, his hunger for perfection. Guilliman, his reason. And me, I was his ambition, the will that dares to rise against the inevitable. It was almost beautiful, this realization. Terrible, yes, but beautiful, like a painting made of blood and gold. I began to test the edges of obedience, small things at first, delays in orders, interpretations of commands that bent rather than broke them. The Emperor did not notice, or perhaps he did, and simply allowed it. That was his way. He taught by silence, by absence, by letting one's own thoughts become the instrument of correction. But silence has a limit. Sooner or later, it becomes consent. And so I moved in the spaces his silence allowed. The gods, if that is what they are, gave me knowledge in dreams, schematics of thought, blueprints of rebellion. I saw fleets shifting in secret, alliances forming like veins beneath the skin of empire. I did not speak of treason, I spoke of reform. I told my brothers that the Emperor's vision had strayed, that he sought to leave us behind while he built something greater in the shadows. And they believed me, because they had already begun to doubt. Doubt is the true weapon of the warp. Not corruption, not mutation, not the twisting of flesh or soul. Doubt, the seed that grows in the soil of silence, the thought that asks, what if? I told them we could free mankind from its last tyrant, even as I knew I was binding it to far darker masters. But the truth did not matter. The illusion was enough. At first, the rebellion was an idea. Then it became a whisper. Then a movement. And then, before the Imperium could take its next breath, a war. They call it the Horus Heresy. But I have always thought of it as something more intimate. It was not the rebellion of legions, but the breaking of a family. It was sons realizing their father would never truly see them, and deciding that if they could not have his love, they would have his throne. We burned the galaxy to ashes for that single, impossible dream. I remember the first world that fell. It was not remarkable. A mining moon on the edge of Segmentum Pacificus. The garrison there refused to renounce their oaths to the Emperor. I gave the order myself. Orbital bombardment. No survivors. From orbit, the explosions looked like blossoms of light. The surface melted into glass. My officers watched in silence, waiting for me to speak. I said only, "Let this be remembered as the first cry of freedom." Even then, I think some of them knew. Freedom and annihilation sound much the same when spoken through the mouth of pride. One by one, the legions chose their sides. Fulgrim, eager for transcendence. Angron, hungry for release. Mortarion, weary of chains. Kurz, drawn to darkness as a moth to flame. Lorgar, smiling, always smiling, whispering the names of gods I now knew too well. Others stood against me. Guilliman, stoic and unyielding. Dorn, carved from duty. Sanguinius, beautiful tragic sanguineous, the last flicker of light before the storm, and the storm came. I see it still in flashes, the void lit by the fires of dying suns, fleets tearing each other apart, their wreckage drifting through eternity. Planets turned to dust, their names erased from memory. It was not a war. It was a requiem, a song for a species tearing itself apart in perfect harmony. At first, I believed I was in control, that I was leading the gods rather than being led by them, that I could use their power and remain untouched. How human that delusion was. How inevitable its breaking. On the eve of Istvan, when brother slew brother, I stood in my command chamber and watched as the planet below became a slaughterhouse. Loyalists lured into ambush, their faith answered by betrayal. I told myself it was necessary. That sacrifice was always the price of progress. But as the screams filled the Vox and the skies turned red, something deep within me cracked. Not regret, not guilt. Those are luxuries of lesser men. It was recognition, the realization that I had become the very thing I sought to destroy. I saw myself reflected in the eyes of those dying below, the tyrant wearing the mask of salvation, the god pretending to be a man. The warp laughed that day. It laughed through the mouths of diamonds and the hearts of men. It laughed through me, and the laughter sounded too much like his voice. After Istvan, there was no turning back. The die was cast. The throne would fall, or the galaxy would. And so, I steered both toward oblivion. The campaigns that followed blur together now. Armageddon after Armageddon. Fleets burning across the void like falling comets. I remember standing upon the bridge, surrounded by the hum of dying machines, feeling the fabric of reality stretch thin around me. The gods had begun to reveal themselves more clearly. They spoke in visions, not as separate beings, but as facets of a single will. Hunger given form. Each offered gifts, promises, understanding. Each told me that I was chosen, that I was the only one who could unmake the false god on Terra. And yet, beneath their flattery, I began to sense something else. Fear. Not of me, but of him. Even in his silence, the Emperor terrified them. His will burned like a barrier they could not pass. They wanted me to destroy it, not because they loved me, but because they could not reach him. It was the weapon they had forged from my own despair. The revelation came too late. By then, I had already become what they needed me to be. Their champion, their pawn, their son. The closer we came to Terra, the more the universe began to unravel. The warp storms thickened. The line between real space and nightmare dissolved. Whole fleets vanished into silence. Reality itself bent under the weight of belief. It was beautiful. It was horrifying. It was the end of everything. When we reached the cradle of mankind, I saw the golden planet as I had never seen it before. Once radiant, now shrouded in ash. Its oceans black, its skies veined with fire. The palace loomed like a corpse crowned in light. I should have felt triumph. I felt only inevitability. The siege lasted 7 months, or perhaps 7 eternities. Time had long since ceased to mean anything. Every wall we breached grew back. Every victory turned to loss. Every cry of defiance from the Loyalists sounded like forgiveness I could not accept. I walked through fields of the dead, my boots sinking into ash made from brothers. I passed statues toppled in my name. I watched cities burn in the shape of my sigil, and in the heart of it all, the palace still stood. Golden, eternal, defiant. He was there, waiting. I could feel his presence long before I saw him. It pressed against my mind like gravity, a constant reminder of what I had abandoned. When the final gate fell, I ascended. Alone. The corridors were silent, save for the distant hum of the throne's power. The walls glowed faintly, reflecting a light that came from nowhere. I walked as one dreaming, my armor heavy, my breath shallow. Every step echoed with memories of another life. The day he called me son, the day he named me Warmaster, the day he left me to burn in the dark. When the doors opened, I saw him, the Emperor, my father. He stood before me, radiant and terrible, the light of creation burning from his eyes. For a heartbeat, everything was still. There were no gods, no war, no empire. Only a father and a son standing on the edge of forever. He did not raise his weapon at once. He looked at me, truly looked, and I saw not anger, but sorrow. The kind of sorrow that cannot be spoken. In that gaze, I remembered everything I had ever been, every victory, every oath, every moment of pride. And I understood the terrible truth. He had never hated me. He had only pitied me. That pity burned hotter than any hatred. I struck first. The blow shattered the air, tore through reality itself. He blocked it with a motion that was almost gentle. Sparks rained like starlight. The chamber trembled. We fought, though fought is too simple a word. It was not combat, but conversation, spoken in the language of gods and sons. Each strike a question, each wound an answer. I asked him, "Why did you abandon us?" His silence said, "Because I had to." I asked him, "Why create us if only to destroy us?" His silence said, "Because I loved you." And when his blade pierced me at last, I understood. He was not killing me. He was saving me from the gods, from the lies, from myself. The pain was absolute, but within it there was peace. For the first time since Davin, the whispers stopped. The gods screamed, their voices torn away by the force of his light. I felt them recoil, burning in agony, dragged back into the void that had birthed them. And I, their champion, fell with them. As I lay dying, he approached. He knelt beside me, the light dimming just enough for me to see his face. There was no anger there, only grief. I wanted to speak, to ask for forgiveness, to tell him I understood. But no words came. He reached out, placing his hand upon my brow, the same gesture he had made the day he first called me son. And then, nothing. No light, no sound, only the slow drift into silence. But even now, in whatever place lies between death and eternity, I can still feel that touch, the weight of it, the warmth, the sorrow. Perhaps that was his final gift. Not mercy, but memory. And here, in the quiet that follows all ruin, I see the truth more clearly than I ever did in life. The Emperor was never a god. The gods were never divine. We were all reflections, fragments of a single thought called humanity, scattered across an endless sky, each believing itself whole. I was his son, his reflection, his mistake, and perhaps, in some distant corner of eternity, still his love. The war ended that day, but the silence endures. They call it the Long War now, an endless struggle carried on by those who still bear my name, though they no longer remember my voice. They fight for me as I once fought for him. The circle continues. I drift within that circle, neither alive nor dead, watching the galaxy. I broke, rebuild itself upon the bones of my failure. Sometimes, in the endless quiet, I think I hear him still, not in judgment, not in anger, just a whisper, softer than breath. My son. And in the echo of that word, I am unmade again. There is no sound in the place where I drift now. No war, no command, no brothers, no father. Only silence, deep, patient, and endless. It is not the silence of peace, nor the silence of death. It is the quiet of consequence. I am weightless within it, suspended between what was and what might have been. There are no walls here, no boundaries, no stars, only faint glimmers of thought, like the reflections of distant suns seen through water. Sometimes they take form, faces, voices, fragments of old battles, the scent of burned ozone on armor plating. They pass through me, and I through them. This is all that remains of Horus Lupercal, Warmaster of the Imperium, the son who rose against his father and burned half the galaxy to ash. A memory, a ghost of will, an echo with no mouth left to scream. I do not dream as mortals do. My thoughts no longer unfold in sequence. They rise like waves, then break upon the unseen shore of what I once was. Each carries a fragment of the man who lived and the monster who ended him. Sometimes I remember the feel of the vengeful spirit's deck beneath my boots, the hum of the engines, the vibration of power moving through a ship the size of a continent, the smell of oil and incense, the prayers whispered by mortal crewmen who thought I could hear them. I remember how their faith made me feel invincible, and how quickly invincibility curdled into isolation. Sometimes I remember laughter, rare, sharp, bright as sunlight. Garviel Loken's voice, full of defiance and belief. Abaddon's silence, always masking the storm beneath. Tarek's grin, bold and reckless. The names drift by like dust, and I reach for them, but they slip away, dissolving into the darkness. The gods do not come here. Their voices have faded, leaving only the residue of their hunger, faint as a dying ember. They gained what they wanted, the death of a dream, the breaking of a sun. Now they feast elsewhere, on newer wars and fresher souls. I wonder if they ever regret it, in whatever way such beings can know regret. But I doubt it. They are not made for reflection, only for desire. Reflection was always my curse. I once believed I was their champion, Their chosen. Now I understand that I was only their language. The words they used to speak ruin into being. The Emperor. I do not know where he is now. I have heard whispers from the edge of eternity, echoes of his light still burning on Terra, trapped in a machine built to hold back the void. They say he endures, neither alive nor dead, feeding his empire with the remnants of his will. They call him God now. They worship the man who forbade worship. That irony would make me laugh, if laughter still meant anything. Perhaps he laughs too, somewhere within his gilded prison. Perhaps not. When I close what remains of my mind, I can almost see him, not as he was at the end, blazing and wrathful, but as he once stood. Tall, calm, patient, his eyes not yet burdened by the weight of divinity. I see the moment before he spoke my name for the first time, the faint hesitation, the pause of a creator looking at his creation and wondering if he had gone too far. He had, and so had I. The universe turns still, even without us. Stars burn and die. New empires rise and fall, and through it all, the Imperium endures, not because of faith, but because of inertia. A vast, grinding machine that cannot stop because no one remembers how to. They speak of me there, though my name has changed. To some, I am a warning. To others, a symbol of defiance. In the endless wars that followed, both sides claimed my shadow as their own. The traitors whispered that I was right, that the Emperor was a tyrant who bound mankind to stagnation. The loyalists cursed my name, yet built monuments to the martyrdom that my fall created. They say that the Warmaster was destroyed utterly, his body obliterated by his father's power, that there is nothing left of him but dust scattered across the void. And yet, here I am, thought without flesh, regret without form, memory without mercy. I have come to realize that destruction is never absolute. Nothing truly ends in this universe. Not light, not sound, not even sin. Everything lingers, transformed, diminished, but never gone. In that truth, perhaps, lies the only kind of immortality we ever achieve. I drift among fragments of what once was, broken shards of the Crusade, glittering like frozen tears in the void. I see them sometimes, visions of armies marching beneath banners of gold, of worlds kneeling in unison, of the first ships breaching the unknown to bring the Emperor's dream to the stars. We believed we were building eternity. We were only building a mirror. Each act of conquest, each proclamation of unity, reflected the same desire that burned within me: to control, to shape, to make sense of chaos through dominion. The Emperor called it order. I called it freedom. The truth is that it was neither. It was fear. Fear disguised as vision. Fear made beautiful through purpose. Fear turned into empire. And in the end, it was that same fear that destroyed us both. When I fell, the galaxy changed. The gods had won, though even they did not understand what they had claimed. They had not destroyed faith. They had given it new shape. Faith in the Emperor. Faith in the Warmaster. Faith in eternal war. The Imperium, in its endless worship of survival, became the very thing we thought we were fighting to prevent. A prison made of prayer. In that prison, the Emperor's light still burns, guiding ships through the warp, holding the madness at bay. A beacon built from sacrifice, a tomb that thinks it is a throne. And beyond that light, the long war continues, endless, futile, inevitable. The sons of my sons still fight beneath banners that bear my sigil, though none remember my face. They call themselves warriors of chaos, champions of the dark gods. They fight the Emperor's descendants, who wear gold instead of black, but whose eyes burn with the same fanatic light. They think they are enemies. They are the same. All of them, slaves to belief. Each convinced their suffering has meaning. Each repeating the same story that I once believed was mine alone. I have watched them from afar, through the haze of the warp, through the fractures that still link what remains of my soul to the echo of real space. I have seen planets burn, civilizations rise and fall, the same pattern written over and over. It is a beautiful horror, this cycle that never ends. The gods feed upon it. The Imperium sustains it. And I, its first architect, can do nothing but witness it. There are moments when I feel movement around me, as though something still listens. Voices not of gods, but of men. Whispers of scholars, priests, dreamers who seek to understand what happened that day on Terra, who imagine that if they can name the sin, they can undo it. They cannot. There is nothing to undo. There is only what has always been, the tension between the need for freedom and the terror of it. That was my tragedy, and his. He wanted to free mankind from the gods. I wanted to free mankind from him. Both of us failed for the same reason, because neither of us understood that mankind will always choose chains if they are made of meaning. The sound of bells reaches me sometimes, faint, distant, like the echo of some forgotten cathedral ringing across the void. Perhaps it is the tolling of lost souls, or the heartbeat of Terra itself. Perhaps it is only memory. Each chime feels like a question unanswered. Was it worth it? Was it necessary? Could it have been otherwise? I have asked myself those questions for an age, and the silence always answers the same way. You already knew the answer before you began. If I could speak to him now, I do not know what I would say. Perhaps nothing. Words were always our failure. We spoke in commands and in silence, never in truth. But if there were a single thing worth saying, one thing that might reach through the ages, it would be this. I understand. I understand what he tried to build, and why he could not tell us. I understand why he carried the burden alone, and why it broke him. And I understand that in trying to save humanity, he only made it more human, flawed, fragile, beautiful in its endless ruin. If I could feel the wind again, I would let it take me. If I could see the stars again, I would not look away. If I could stand before him again, I would not raise my blade. Perhaps that is redemption, though there is no one left to grant it. Time, if it exists here, moves like dust through water. The echoes of my name grow fainter with every century. Soon, even the gods will forget me, and when they do, I will finally be free. Until then, I drift, Not in torment, not in peace, but in understanding. I am Horus. I was the Warmaster, the son, the betrayer, the fallen. I was the dream that devoured itself. And though the galaxy no longer remembers the truth, I will carry it until the last star dies. The Emperor still sits upon his throne of light. The Imperium still prays. The gods still hunger, and humanity still endures, broken, blind, and magnificent. Perhaps that is enough. Perhaps that was all he ever wanted. In the end, there are no victors, only survivors. And in the quiet between their battles, my echo still lingers, not as curse, not as warning, but as a reminder that even the brightest light casts a shadow, and even the deepest shadow remembers the light. The void hums softly around me. It sounds almost like breathing. Perhaps it is his. Perhaps it is mine. It no longer matters. The dream continues, and somewhere, in the silent heart of eternity, the Emperor still whispers, and I still listen. If you're still here, maybe start the next episode, or just let the quiet take you. And if you've already drifted off, that's all right. Good night, traveler. Sleep well beneath the stars.